what we're doing, pretty simple concept. Jack Antonoff produced albums. I am not including ones that he produced like less than 3 songs for. I feel like even 3 songs is generous. I think I made it like 3 songs plus because I wanted to have 1989 in here. He hasn't produced the entirety of all of these albums, but I feel like he's produced enough tracks on these albums to say it's a Jack Antonoff produced record. All right, let's start over here with 1989. Okay, the songs that Jack worked on here are great. Out of the Woods, among others, are some of my favorite tracks off of the album. I think this is an amazing pop record. I think that this is Taylor Swift's best pop album besides maybe Red. I think this album's great. I'm saving the amazing tier for the albums that I think are like just beyond amazing, albums that I would probably change nothing about. 1989 has like Bad Blood on it, and that bridge on Shake It Off. I've talked enough shit about that bridge on Shake It Off. Out of all like the big Taylor Swift hits, that's probably my least favorite that like went absolutely crazy, besides maybe Look What You Made Me Do, if that was big enough. Reputation, very different feelings on this one. It's pretty clear. It's known why I dislike Reputation, but to give a quick synopsis, I don't think she sells whatever character she's playing on Reputation very well. I think the production is very trendy. It sounded dated the day that it was released. All the dubstep, EDM style stuff on here just sounds like garbage to me now. And at the time, it still sounded bad. It was such a short-sighted record to make it sound like this. And personally, there's a lot about this album that I really don't like. Getaway Car, still a great song. I think Getaway Car is a great song, which Jack Antonoff did produce on this record. So props to Jack on that one. But overall, I really don't like the production style of this album. I feel like it's corny and almost as corny as the lyrics on this record. So overall, not a huge fan of this one. And I've made that pretty clear. I think that my reasoning is pretty consistent given the more recent Taylor Swift album that Jack Antonoff produced. I have similar issues with, which we'll get to later. All right, what are we moving on to next? Melodrama. The production is a massive highlight on Melodrama for me. I think that it is so cohesive, so well done, so interesting. All the risks that is taken on this album production-wise, I think pays off. There's some really crazy sounds on songs like Hard Feelings, and just the atmosphere that's built on this album is amazing. Conceptually, it's seen all the way through. I think it's got consistent themes, well written, super interesting album. I think that there is so much to love about this record, and every single time I go back to it, I'm like, yeah, this album is pretty much a perfect pop record to me. It's got like bangers. It's got a really amazing ballad. I think one of the best ballads of the past decade or so is on this album with Liability. I love this album. This is a beautiful album, absolutely gorgeous. I think it's amazing. I love this album. It's Lorde's best work by far. It's the most impressive like synthetic sort of record that I think Jack Antonoff has worked on. So Masseduction, I like this album. I know that not everybody loves this one, and I honestly wasn't crazy about it the first time I listened to it, but severely underrated, I think. I think that this is a really good record. I don't know if I can put it up there with 1989, because I think 1989 is the better album of the two, but I love the synth work that Jack has on here. It's very different than a lot of the other pop records that are kind of synth-based that he worked on, but I feel like this one is super solid. There's a lot of like cool little arpeggio moments on there that I think is really cool, and I think St. Vincent and Jack have amazing chemistry. I don't think that they can make anything bad together. They seem to have a really good balance. I've really liked everything that they've worked on together, so I think Masseduction isn't good though, because there's another St. Vincent album that Jack has worked on that I think is a lot better. So yeah, I think Masseduction solidly and good, but I do find it to be a pretty overlooked album in Jack's discography. Now we're moving on to Norman fucking Rockwell. To a lot of people, this is Jack's magnum opus, and I can understand why. I would agree with them for the most part. I think that everything about this album, front to back, this record is amazing. Not to just talk about Jack, but like Lana's songwriting on here. This is Lana's best songwriting ever. I think Lana came a long way from some of the corny lyricism on Born to Die that I was not a huge fan of when it came out. I'm still not a huge fan of it. But the maturity and how unique but like not goofy the lyrics are on this album, I love. I think that the writing is really great, and I think that the space that Jack makes in this album production-wise really highlights that lyricism. I believe one of the tracks on this album, Jack has said, is his favorite song that he's ever worked on. I think it's Venice Bitch. Which I can totally understand. There really isn't anything bad I can say about this record, besides maybe a reference to an iPad, which I still think to this day is a little bit jarring. But besides that, this album's amazing. I love this record, and I don't think that there's another album out there that sounds like this album. It's completely its own thing, and I don't think he's ever going to make an album like this again, and hopefully it stays that way. Because I think this is kind of a one-of-a-kind record. All right, moving on to another Taylor Swift album, Lover. Jack didn't work on every song on this album, but he worked on a lot of them. I feel like this is another kind of lackluster record from Jack and Taylor. Listen, when those two hit together, they hit. When they don't, they kind of just don't. I don't think it's as bad as Reputation because there are songs on it that I really, really like. I think False God is great. I think Cruel Summer is great. I think Lover, the title track, is great. There's a lot to like about this album. And I think that while there is some moments on this album that's really cringy, you know the way I feel about Me. I think Me is maybe Taylor's worst song ever. I know that's not a controversial take, but there are some lyrics on that song and You Need to Calm Down that is just like, oh my God, taking shots at me like Patron. Really, Taylor? I feel like a lot of the instrumentals on here just totally fall flat, and they're instrumentals that could be on pretty much any album. It's not saying all the production is bad. Again, like I really love some of the production moments on here, but it's just not as consistent as some other albums he's worked on in the pop landscape. So I'm just going to put it in okay, because I don't think it's as bad as Reputation. Moving on to another Taylor Swift album, Folklore. Everything that I said about Reputation, I kind of feel the opposite about Folklore. I feel like Taylor sounds natural, believable. I know that this album isn't about necessarily Taylor herself, but the way that she tells these stories and the way that she plays these characters in these songs and talks about these issues, this type of album feels like it comes naturally to her. It feels like she's not forcing herself to make a smash hit anywhere on this record, which I kind of feel that way about certain other albums that Taylor has made and Taylor and Jack have worked together on. I think Folklore is a fantastic record. I think it is consistent all the way through. Is it mind-blowing? Is it melodrama or Norman fucking Rockwell for me? I don't think it is. I think that there's some amazing moments. Probably the most consistent album in Taylor's catalog. I don't think there's a single dud on there. I think that it's so cohesive, so pretty all the way through. And I think Aaron Dessner's work on here is fantastic too. I think the Bon Iver feature is great. All of the songs that Jack worked on works in the context of the record, and I feel like Aaron and Jack both produced really well on this album, and it doesn't sound like, oh, this is a Jack Antonoff song, oh, this is an Aaron Dessner song. It kind of just, they all sound like Folklore songs, and I think that that's great. I think that this will go down as a very important album in Taylor's career and a very important album in general. I think taking a risk like this for Taylor, and this is a very different direction for Jack in general too, and I feel like he totally killed it. And the writing on here is the best of Taylor's career, the most consistent of Taylor's career too. And I know that Jack has a hand in that too. So I'm going to put it in great. Not that there's anything necessarily bad about this album. It just did not blow my mind in the way that Melodrama or Norman fucking Rockwell did. I didn't walk away from it totally blown away in the same way, you know? But Folklore is great. Okay, moving on to Daddy's Home, St. Vincent. Like I said earlier, I think St. Vincent and Jack work together really well. One time somebody asked me, out of any of the artists that Jack works with, who do I think has the best chemistry? And I think St. Vincent is my answer, because I feel like those two together, they haven't dropped anything, you know what I mean? And they've done very different types of records. There's something about like St. Vincent and Jack when they work together and like just kind of the sound of the album. Maybe it's because on an album like Daddy's Home, it just feels so live and it feels so collaborative, you know, and the musicianship on that record is amazing. This is a rock album, or you could call it like, you know, it's like more of like a 70s sort of pop record. It's got the heart and soul, man. Daddy's Home, I'm going to put it in great. Some people may say it's amazing. I think it's pretty close, but these two are just, they're just so much better in comparison, I think, as far as like me walking away from it and being like, holy shit, there's never going to be another album like that ever. I don't feel that way about Daddy's Home, but It's fucking great. Love that album. I think it's the best out of these three. So, oh my God, people in the chat do not like that. Chat, I'm sorry. I just don't feel the same way about Daddy's Home as I do Norman fucking Rockwell Melodrama. But it's amazing. I love St. Vincent, and I love this album. It's better than Masseduction, and I think it's the best record and great. All right, Chemtrails Over the Country Club. This is going to be maybe a controversial one because I really do like the aspects of this album that kind of reminds me of Norman fucking Rockwell, because it is very tangential to that album. It feels like a continuation in some ways, but also very different in others. I feel like the downfall of this album isn't on the production side of things. I feel like some of the instrumentals are a little bit more stale. You know how I said in Norman fucking Rockwell, like Jack leaves a lot of space for the songwriting, and the songwriting is so stellar that I'm so happy that he did that. It's such a smart production choice. I don't feel like the writing is as strong on Chemtrails. There's more spacious moments that really leaves you to pay attention to the lyrics and what Lana's saying. I feel like those just aren't as good. Those moments aren't as good on Chemtrails. There are songs that I really, really love. I think White Dress is one of Lana's best songs ever. I know that's very controversial. Some people do not like the vocals on that song, but it is so good. The risk on White Dress paid off. I entirely agree. I think it's one of Lana's best songs ever. If we were just talking about White Dress blew me away in amazing sort of territory. But as an album, as a whole, I think it's just good. It's nothing crazy amazing. All right, moving on to Arizona Baby, Kevin Abstract, one that people forget about a lot, probably because it's the only real like hip hop centric album that Jack has produced, even though it's not hip hop through and through. I think this album's great. I think that it is severely underrated. It does feel a little rushed, I think, and everybody seems to agree on that. I feel like it could have been refined a little bit more. It definitely has a little bit of an unfinished feeling to it, but I really do like the direction of this album. I feel like Kevin and Jack sound really good together. I feel like there's a lot of chemistry here, but it just kind of feels a little unfinished. I don't feel like they spent as much time on this record as they could have, because I think it could have been amazing, but it's not quite there, but I think it's still a pretty goddamn good album. So I'm going to put it in good. All right, Gaslighter, The Chicks. I think this one's just okay. Listen, when I talked about this before, I was like, Gaslighter is just kind of, it's fine. I don't think it's great. And people were like, what? How could you say that? I don't see it. I went back to it. I don't see it. I don't see what's so great about this record. I think that the songwriting falls a little flat. I don't think it's produced bad or anything like that, but it's not that interesting. I don't find much to latch on to. It kind of falls flat, especially considering the rest of the Dixie Chicks career. Like, there's no songs on here that really hold up to other like Dixie Chicks classics. So I think it's just okay. Moving on to Sling. All right, now this might be one of the more controversial ones, but I think Sling is fucking amazing. I think it is so good. And there was a point of time I think that I would have just put this album in great, but I think this album is amazing. I think Clairo's songwriting is fantastic on here. Honestly, the more that you dig into what Clairo's saying on this album, the better it is. Every song on this album, I think I've had my moment with at this point. I think Sling's fantastic. I think it is heavily underrated, and I think after a certain point people are going to look back on this album with a different lens. One of the reasons that Sling is not getting the attention that I feel like it deserves is because Immunity people love. I love Immunity, but that's a very different record than this one. I think Clairo told Jack, this is the record I want to make. I want to make like a 70s folk inspired album that doesn't sound dated, doesn't sound regressive, but still wears its influences on its sleeve. And there are very few albums that I think were done as good as this one was, in terms of like, you know, obviously drawing inspirations from Elliott Smith and Nick Drake, and I feel like it's done so well. Maybe this is coming from the perspective of a big Elliott Smith fan, but I think this record is just so good. Now I'm sure some people are wondering, have my opinions changed on Solar Power? No, I think I was generous. I think I was generous when this album first came out. There really isn't much to extract from this album, and I think honestly, everything that Lorde said about this album after it came out and after a lot of people didn't like it, knowing her intentions of this album almost makes it worse. Saying that all of these things that she's writing about on songs like Mood Ring is supposed to be ironic, and maybe some people are going back on it, they're like, oh, it's so obvious, how do you not pick up on the irony? I don't see it. I don't think she spells it out very well. I think that it just kind of, this album, Solar Power, just kind of sounds like Lorde is the person that apparently she was trying to make fun of. That's what this record sounds like to me, with boring, stale production. Literally, Solar Power, the song, again, it sounds like it's for an infomercial that only plays like past midnight. There's nothing I like about this record, really, at this point. And I remember, I look back on my live reaction to this album, and you can see me in real time trying to be like, oh, trying to find justification. Oh, Mood Ring is pretty good. So disappointing. Terrible album. Probably one of the biggest disappointments in popular music in recent history. Bad album. Worse than Reputation. At least Reputation is Getaway Car. All right, Dance Fever. I've been listening to this album every once in a while this year, and I think it's good. I think it's really, really good. I think it's a really good Florence album. Is it Lungs? Is it Ceremonials? No. Those albums would be in great. Dance Fever, all the way, really good, fleshed out concept, amazing vocals. It is in desperate need of a chorus. It needs a chorus. This album does not have one really memorable chorus, but I love the sound of it. I think that the sound of the record is great. I love the writing. I love how it's a concept that Florence saw all the way through. Listen, I think that this album is full of a lot of builds to nothing, and I feel like that's the downfall of it. But that being said, I think it's the worst out of these albums on this list, but on this tier, but I think it's good. Moving on to the 1975. On Being Funny in a Foreign Language, I feel like the songs that Jack Antonoff worked on were really, really good. There isn't a weak point in this album in terms of the track list. There are some weird lyrical moments, but that is just going to happen when it's an album written by Matty Healy. And not everything about this album is flawless or amazing. I'm gonna tell you right now, it's not quite in the amazing tier, but I think as of right now, this is one of the best albums of the year in terms of consistency of a track list, in terms of cohesiveness. It turns out when you rein in the 1975 and you rein in Matty Healy and you say, okay, let's make a 12-track album that, every song on it sounds like it's from the same album. Turns out when you do that, amazing results happen. And I'm not saying that they haven't made a great album before. I think that A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships, I think that album, their 2018 record, is the best album that they've ever worked on. But it does go in too many directions at certain points, I think. In Notes on a Conditional Form, we can all acknowledge that it goes in too many different directions. So you need to rein Matty Healy in sometimes. And I feel like this is the first case where you actually reined in the band and you're like, okay, this is a cohesive record that you can listen back to back without any really jarring moments. You can put this album on repeat. This is a really good album to buy on vinyl. And I'm really happy that the band made this. And I think Jack Antonoff loves making a cohesive record. And I think that he might have a big part in doing that. I actually think that Matty said that Jack had a big part in the reason that this album sounds so cohesive and put together and focused in energy. And I love that about it. Really interesting songwriting, sometimes a little bit too interesting, but extremely well produced. I love Jack's work on this, and love this album. I'm gonna put it in great. We're moving on to the most recent Jack Antonoff produced project, Midnights by Taylor Swift. If you are seeing this later, I might upload this to YouTube. If you're seeing this later, you must know that this is I'm doing this video less than a week after this album was produced. So who knows? My opinion could change on it. I personally don't see that happening, but this is one of Taylor Swift's worst albums. This is one of the worst produced Taylor Swift albums. I think that it's pretty uninteresting all the way through. I don't think that there are very many moments where I'm like, oh my god, this instrumental is fantastic, like I have all over these albums on the top. And man, the lyrics don't help, because I hate having fun, and this album is so fun, and I can't stand it, and I'm jealous and misogynistic, and I'm a hater. I just hate Taylor Swift. All of these things are just so true about me, and those are all the justifications you guys can have for why I don't like this album, because there's no way it has anything to do with the music. I don't sound bitter at all right now. No, okay, all right. Midnights is not a good album. I do not think that Midnights is good. I think that Taylor has a chance where she can bounce back from this. Of course she did. She released Folklore and Evermore, 2 years ago. She still has the ability to write a good song. There is just not a single example of that on this album. I think maybe Taylor and Jack need to take a break from each other, because their creative tank seems to be be at an all-time low with each other. She sounds awkward on most of these instrumentals. She doesn't sound believable on stuff like Vigilante shit. She sounds less believable on Vigilante shit than she does on Reputation, and I'm not buying a single word she's saying on Reputation. Yeah, I mean, there's fun moments. Like, I think that Karma is a fun song, but even the aspects of this album that I really, really like at certain points where I'm like, oh yeah, this is really, really good. I'm smacked over the head with one of the corniest lyrics I've ever heard in my life. Maybe I can reconcile with that. I can see myself really enjoying Karma at a certain point, you know, after I get past Spider Boy and Karma is a cat. If I can get past some of the Home Goods quotes, maybe it's not in the bad tier. But honestly, like production-wise, it's lacking. Lyrically, it's lacking. It's not as good as Lover. It's not as good as Gaslighter by the Chicks. It's in bad. And it might be worse than Reputation, but we'll see. I think as of right now, it's in bad. I might change my thoughts on it. Listen, I'm not going to make any grand statements that I will forever think that this album is terrible, but as of right now, I think it's a massive disappointment. For me, what I'm seeing from fans of this album is it feels like they're reeling, grasping at straws, working overtime trying to love this album. I'm not gonna force myself to do that. You guys have fun doing that, but I just cannot get behind this record. No, I believe that some of you guys like it. But I don't believe that everybody who is, scrambling to her defense over every little thing loves it. I don't believe that. If you're like bumping this record every day, good for you. I wish I liked it as much as you guys. My criticisms of it, I feel I'm pretty confident in. Anyway, that is my ranking as of right now. I think Solar Power is the worst of the bad tier. I will say that. Reputation has Getaway Car, and ooh man, Getaway Car is really, and honestly, Reputation has certain moments, certain choruses that I really like. And then all of a sudden she starts rapping. And then, okay, in Midnight's, let's just say it's the best of the bad right now. Gaslighter, the Chicks, it's okay. It's the definition of fine. Lover has a couple great songs on it, so I'll take it. Dance Fever, fleshed out concepts. Love a lot of things about this album, but I think it's just good. Arizona Baby, wish they spent a little more time on it. It could have been great, but I think it's just good. Chemtrails Over the Country Club, writing is a little lacking, and production isn't as great as Norman fucking Rockwell. Masseduction, really, really solid. It's just not as good as Folklore. Folklore is great. 1989, Taylor's best pop album. The 1975, just talked about that one. That one's great. Daddy's Home, yeah. I mean, a lot of people would argue it should be in an amazing category, but I don't feel the way that I feel about these three albums, which I think are some of my favorite albums of all time at this point. Sling, Clairo, one of the best callbacks to 70s folk music I think I've ever heard. Norman fucking Rockwell, Lana Del Rey's best album, and Melodrama, one of the best pop albums of all time. So that's my tier list. Solid list. I feel like I did pretty well.